Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the University of Illinois Local Government Information and Educational Network webinar series, Local Government Strategies for Digital Government. This program includes three sessions, the first being today, the best practices in e-government. The second are in technology planning, which will be held on October 15th. And then the third and final, using data and analytics to drive innovative in government, are November the 19th. Each of these live presentations will be recorded and made available for review on our local government website. To ensure the best possible quality in our recording, microphones will be muted during the presentation. We do, however, encourage you to add questions in the chat space as we move through the presentation. The presenter can review your comments and will be able to respond. All three of these webinars are presented by Dr. Gant, Professor and Director of the Center for Digital Inclusion at the U of I Graduate School of Library and Information Science. This series is a part of the Illinois Digital Innovation Leadership Program made possible through the funding provided through the Office of Provost and the College of ACES. This cross-campus initiative demonstrates the core mission of the University of Illinois and brings research to the from the land-grant institution to the citizens of Illinois. Dr. Gant is a professor at the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois and at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where he serves as the director of the Center for Digital Inclusion, CDI. Dr. Gant is an expert in e-government, geospatial information systems, strategic planning, and information systems. Jon has worked exclusively for local government leaders throughout the U.S. and internationally. He was one of the first professors in the U.S. to offer a course on graduate and executive students on e-government while on faculty at a leading public administrative programs. Dr. Gant received his MS and PhD degrees from the Heinz School at Carnegie Mellon University, where he studies public policy and information management. If you would, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gant for our presentation today.
Well, again, thank you, and it's a real pleasure to do our webinar today, and thanks for everybody for joining us during your lunch period today. Our goal here is to talk about best practices in e-government, and this is going to be the first of a three-part series looking at the role of information and communication technology. Today we'll focus on best practice and look more at the broader picture. Then we'll have our second session on technology planning. How do I do this for my local government? And then the third, we'll look specifically at the data as well, the data analytics, which is such an important and emerging field right now. So as I'm going along, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat window here. I teach a class online, and so I'm very comfortable in this space, so I can I'll try to answer your questions as we're going along, and I may even follow up and ask you to go ahead and speak so you can elaborate further as well. But please feel free as things come up, ask questions and so forth. And today I'm actually in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm presenting at the Broadband Communities meeting today. A big part of what I'm doing now that really has a big impact on local government is the deployment of broadband. And as many of you know, Urbana-Champaign actually has one of the fastest broadband networks in the country. We built a new fiber-based broadband network starting back in 2009, and it's live, up and living. Now we've got about 1,500 users online, and we're expanding it to the rest of Urbana-Champaign. So I'm here today speaking about that, but it's good that I can also use technology and do the e-government webinar as well. So yeah, and this project is funded through the Office of the Provost along with the Extension Office, and it's part of a 2-year grant that we have. So it's been a real pleasure to have this grant, and one of our key goals is to really enhance digital inclusion throughout our state, letting people understand about technology more so we can make our state even stronger. And so it's been a real pleasure, and I've been working closely with Kathy Brown and her team to focus on e-government as well. Today, what I'll do is give us a broader introduction to e-government and talk about key points of strategy, and then drive us towards the discussion about how do we maximize the public value around e-government. I'll use e-government or digital government interchangeably, but what I really mean here is the use of information and communication technologies to enable government to provide its services to the public. And I also mean it broadly to include the governing side as well, too, and the way in which we govern democratically in the U.S. and through local government as well. And so I just want to look at that relationship of using technology to help with providing services, improving interaction with citizens, to enhance openness of government, and so forth. I've been doing a lot of work in e-government actually since the early days in the early 1990s, and I've published a number of studies looking at the adoption of diffusion. So this is something I've looked and studied and kept track of over the years, and a number of my students that have worked with me now have gone on to become professors that focus on e-government as well. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm teaching a course on it this semester, and so there's a lot to talk about. So I'm glad we were able to break this up into 3 different parts. With this grant that we have with Extension, as I tell everybody, this is one of the best grants I've ever had because, first, Extension is really great to work with. It's just, they play such an important role for our land grant mission at the University of Illinois to really reach out all across our state, all across the different communities, both urban and rural, and really try and address the various needs that the various communities have. We know the history, it focused in agriculture and so forth, but now with the greater use of information communication technology, we're really trying to expand the capacity throughout the state to use technology. And so that's what our grant is allowing us to do. It's a lot of fun because not only working with Kathy's group and with local government, but we're also working with 4-H and putting on programs to help youth understand this new generation of technology, building new things with fab labs and social media and that type of thing. So it's very exciting, and the e-government is a very big part of this work that we're doing. Digital government is really interesting when we look at what all components are that comprise what we mean by digital government. We're talking about the business of government and putting it into a digital form. Think about everything that a local government does or state or federal government does. It's a tremendous amount of things that they do, and it's all. If we look at a government, look at local government, what they really are is, one, providing frontline service to everybody that lives in the community. But all this is driven by data and information. Local government's really an information-intensive business if you really think about it. I mean, we know the obvious way. We go in person and we got to fill out all those forms, and obviously those forms generate a lot of information, a lot of data. But we think about everything that you do in local government, from public safety to the street lights, to keeping our roads clear, providing all the services that we need, helping with the school system, helping with the underground infrastructure, helping with telecommunication data infrastructure, and so forth. We think about the economic development and community development aspects of it, housing and so forth, and attracting business. And making our communities good, strong, vibrant economic places. And we also do this in a way that really brings in the citizen to be involved as much or as little as they'd like to. And so technology is really giving us an opportunity to find new ways of fulfilling all these different roles. And the transformation is remarkable that we see. If you look back in a broader historic term, we think about where we came from in our economy, especially in the Midwest, being heavy agriculture mixed in with shifts and changes in to manufacturing, to other key inventions, to this information revolution where we're seeing much of what we do in our lives become digitized, and we're using computers as the engine for the relationships we have with each other, how we do business, how we interact with government, how we manage our social lives, and so forth. And so we're at this point where we've got this marriage of the way that we've been doing things along with technology. And we're really trying to figure out now, how do we do a better job of enhancing digital inclusion? How do we improve our lives with technology? Now, as much as I, like technology, I'm a real nerd about it and so forth, technology for me is not the answer. What matters for me, especially for local government, is how do we do a better job of governing? And a computer doesn't solve the problem. It's really about how we decide to work together, how we provide our services, and things like that. Technology can make it more effective and more efficient, but it's certainly not the answer. And so I really will talk about e-government from the perspective of not only the technology, but the people and the organization. And those are the things that really matter more than the technology. But to enhance use, we also need to improve digital inclusion in our society. And so by digital inclusion, what I mean is, you've heard the term of the digital divide, where it's having access to computers or not having access. Digital inclusion goes a bit further. It's not only having access, but it's also having those skills to be able to use it and use it effectively. And then also marrying together the technology, the skills, and developing applications or uses that really add value to the public. So not just building it because it's cool, but really building it so that it makes a difference in the day-to-day life of the people that live within our communities. Really helping those families that are waking up early to make sure the kids get to school on time, and our families that are out having to make it to work every day, or dealing with health issues that may come up in your family, or somebody starting a new business within your community, or somebody that may have a new idea, want to invent something. How do we really make our communities rich and vibrant, so that whatever our information needs that we have, how do we really make sure that everybody can experience and use technology in a way to help them as well? So there's a lot of promise with e-government that we are seeing. We talk about improving life in our cities, life in our small towns and rural spaces that we live in, and so forth. And so there's a lot of promise, because we think that technology can be used in so many different ways. But there's always this question of saying, are we really doing the right things? Are we really doing enough to address the critical information needs of our community? Not only do we want to provide services, but we also want to help people have a voice. So if your town council or city council or your school board, your county government is having open public deliberation about things, are there ways that we can use technology to help people be more involved, to have more voice? I mean, simple things like making sure the meeting notices are published, in compliance with the Open Meeting Act. If not everybody can come, but after the meeting is over, are the meeting notes or the agenda or the recording, the video of the meeting made publicly available for people to view on their own as well? And then you can even be more daring and say, are there ways that we can also bring in the voice of the public through technology? Can we use Facebook or Twitter to get public response to different ideas and proposals? So there's a lot of promise that's out there, and we are seeing that e-government is really catching on. As I mentioned, the early days of e-government started in the mid-1990s. One of the first case studies that I wrote was one of the very first e-government sites that was in the state of Kansas. Kansas, as you know, is a very broad state, very rural, and it turned out that for lawyers that needed certain legal briefs and access to government information actually had to drive to the state capitol to get to access this information. So they would make long drives. And there was a tool, and actually it helped develop this tool at the University of Minnesota with some colleagues from the University of Illinois, developed this tool called Gopher, where you could actually dial in and get some of these government documents online. Saved a lot of travel. And that became the early genesis of saying, what more can we do? As you know, the University of Illinois really played a very pivotal role in developing the internet and the first browser. And it was really with the idea of saying, how can we make information more widely available through computer technology and do it in a way that we break down barriers, that you don't need a lot of particular skill or special software or special computer to be able to do that. So since those early days, we're really seeing eGovernment catch on at all levels of government and also internationally as well. And now we have some really good data to talk about some of the key things that people are doing when they visit U.S. government websites, which sites they go to, and things like that. So we're at a point now where we're becoming more comfortable using the technology. We're becoming more comfortable going online to use, to get government information. And our attitudes are quickly changing and showing that we have greater acceptance of the technology. So we see in a study this is from 2005, so it's a little old, but that in 2005, at that point, 28% of the public said, yeah, we think by putting services online it will make government more accountable. Roughly 20% thought it would make government more efficient and cost effective. There was a big move actually to prove homeland security and so forth. And in the follow-up research to these attitude studies that are out today show that these numbers now are over between 50 and 75% of the public feel this way. And so we're really seeing significant improvement in the overall acceptance of technology. And we're also seeing that we have to think more about delivering our service. We're comfortable, as local government leaders, we're comfortable with the traditional service where somebody comes in face to face. And we're comfortable thinking about the brick and mortar setting for providing the service. We know that if we've got good lighting, it's well painted, well air conditioned, and so forth, carpet and decorated, that creates a great service experience. We understand that with brick and mortar services, that services are going to be like from 8 to 4, 8 to 5, that type of thing. People are going to travel to the location and things like that. But now as we shift to providing more services to complement our brick and mortar services online, our space for providing the service is changing significantly. And I think it's a little hard for us to really get ourselves a good understanding of what that really means. Now the space that we're working in is the computer screen itself. And the service is offered 24/7. People can be waking up in the middle of the night in their pajamas to get online and pay a tax bill or something like that. It's a very different interface now for working with the public. There's certainly a greater level of anonymity in doing this as well. But we have to now think about our services not only in terms of brick and mortar, but also in terms of what it means for this digital space. And the most important thing to really understand is that our new real estate, quote unquote, for us to provide these services becomes our computer screen, as I just mentioned. And this screen comes in many different sizes, from your desktop computer to your laptop computer to your phone and your tablet. And so we have to think about not only is the person on a different type of device, they may be in different types of settings as well. I flew down here yesterday, so I was in the Chicago O'Hare Airport, and sure enough, people were doing all kinds of things on their devices, paying bills, checking emails, watching movies, and things like that in this kind of, in this sort of space. And we have to really think about how our life is changing and where we feel comfortable using technology and where we don't, and really consider those kinds of factors as we're trying to provide these services online. And then the other thing that we have to think about is how this is evolving from the early web days to the social media era, where In the early days of e-government, it was the local government was really responsible for putting up the website and providing the services. Nowadays, with the social media era, we've disintermediated the local government. In other words, you could literally have somebody in your community set up their own Facebook page or Twitter page and talk about the services that government provides. In cities that are making their data publicly available, we're seeing that the developer community is grabbing that data and developing their own applications. A very popular application that we're seeing all across the United States is called See, Click, Fix. I don't know if you all have seen it or used it, but it's an early example where some young folks said, well, we want to write applications, our own applications, so the public can report problems with streets or light fixtures or other infrastructure problems in a city. So instead of the government doing it, you come use our application for it. It changes the whole game in terms of public accountability because, one, the government doesn't own the site, and two, anybody from your community can go in and identify problems. It's a good thing, for potholes and things like that, but it also puts this new pressure on local government leaders and elected officials to be responsive to the public who are organized in a new and very different sort of way. So this social media era is really changing how we think about e-government and so forth. So as I've been studying these trends, and my colleagues have been studying these trends over the last 20-some years, there's some things that are imperative that we have to keep in mind. First, we have to think about the business of government and the whole nature of government. First of all, government is very different than the private sector, which you all know. One of the key differences is the public nature of local government. Services have to be provided to everyone. You're not like a company that can serve a certain market, but instead services have to be available to everyone. So that means accessibility is very important. The readability, when you move from brick and mortar to digital, readability, literacy becomes very important. What's the right reading level so everybody who comes to the website can understand the content that you have there? You have to serve people with all varying levels of computer comfort, from people that may be first-time users to people that are pros, that are experts. And how do you design a site for everybody in between as well? The service has to be is ubiquitous, and it's also available anytime, anywhere. And how do you deal with that? Trustworthiness is a big issue, and it's a number of different studies that look at trust in government. Trust runs the lack of trust runs very high. So here you're presenting a service that's online, and you want broad use of it. How do you overcome these trust barriers when you try and provide this online? Confidentiality is another important thing. We have, in our mandates in terms of little d democracy, is the notion that we have the right to be anonymous when we're interacting with government. We don't have to go in and register ourselves and say, I need service or I need information. We have the right to go and not give our identity to get information and things like that. And so the web, we're able to do that, but it really raises these big questions about security and privacy when you're doing that. And so these are just a number of different things that we have to think about. And then there's other, legal constraints in terms of what government can do and so forth. So we have to keep this in mind when we're thinking about building an e-government website. And over the years, I've had done a number of different studies in the U.S. and then also international studies. And as we talk more with the public and talk with local leaders like yourselves, we see there are a number of challenges. We know that citizens in general, tend to be very dissatisfied with government services. And so then now you're going to put the service online, and there's a new level of dissatisfaction that may happen. Costs are difficult to control with technology. To scope the projects properly, to find good folks to develop it, whether it's internal or you use outside consultants or development groups. How do you control the costs for doing this and scoping it properly? These security risks make front page news, and as you know, the federal government has had 3 or 4 embarrassing security breaches. The Office of Personnel Management, for example, lost its entire personnel database, was hacked, and so forth. And so these security risks are very serious concerns. And then a thing that we don't think about so much, but that you as government leaders and local leaders deal with every day, is the local issues. Working with your teams inside of your local government, the legal constraints or the legal requirements that may be pushed on you, and also political issues. I know now in the state of Illinois, Kathy and I went down to the township officials of Illinois summer meeting at Rend Lake. It was a really great experience, but it was the day after a new announcement from the governor's office and legislature about new legislation requiring townships to have a website, have all this information on the website, and so forth. And my first reaction is, cool, more websites. But then my next reaction is like, wait a second. When I read the legislation, I said, wait a second, where's the money for these websites? Where's the money for the developer? Where's the money for the requirement to have a web administrator for each township? Where's that money going to come from? And it's not cheap, and so forth. And then there's a real political issue around e-government that we have to consider. In our next presentation, or in the third one, we'll talk about data. And this is the fighting ground in terms of e-government. It's not so much about service. I mean, service is very important. It's about the underlying data that can be used to characterize the performance of any government body. There's always issues when you have outside people looking at your data. Can they look at your data and assess the performance of your local government or your department? So, for example, a very popular web application that was developed early on, actually with Indianapolis, was this website where you can go and track snow removal. Now, you would think, you guys know well, snow removal is a very political issue. I've heard these stories over the years. In Chicago, you had the different aldermen were more effective at getting their streets plowed than others, by paying off folks and that kind of thing. Well, Indianapolis said, we'll have this thing called Snow Fighter, and we'll put the information online so you can actually look online and see what streets are being plowed and so forth. Well, that was pretty good, but it became very political when people started analyzing the data and to see if the snow removal patterns were really followed patterns of political favoritism throughout in Indianapolis, for example. And so then there became a resistance to post this information in real time. And then also the data was later on used in labor negotiations between the union drivers, or a group who wanted to organize the snow removal drivers as well. So that became a very big political issue. So these are things that make it really hard and make us more sober about the reality of building a system. We've got technology constraints, legal constraints, political constraints, organizational constraints that we have to really consider. So the reality is very sobering. And I imagine many of you have felt like the people here, especially if you are in the IT group or the computer group of your local government, you get it from all sides when you start building new computer systems. And my background is in systems analysis, and I've built lots of systems, and I really empathize with that. So you got these concerns, especially when we look, break things down to the data about who owns this data, how can it be used, if you're working with outside vendors, what role do they have in access to the data? One reason why you see so many outside vendors want to provide these e-government websites is they really want that data because they know that's the goal. And even the big companies, we look at Google, we look at Facebook, we look at Twitter. They've got very large government practices, and in part is to get at some very rich data as well. This question about intellectual property, and then what we're calling up now mashed up management, the notion that you can have outside groups that aren't even part of government make up their own applications about activities within your local government as well. So these are all big things that local government leaders around the country are identifying as key issues. So one thing that I want to do today is, I'm setting up a broader picture, and we're kind of at the higher 50,000 foot level at talking about things. But let me start to drill down a little bit more. And there's a lot that we can learn about the diffusion of e-government over time. This slide here is a slide that I always include in my presentations when I'm introducing e-government, because it does a number of different things. One, it talks about the key phases in e-government. And it also shows that as e-government goes from just a website where you've got basic information to a site where you can actually perform transactions, to what we call transformational e-government, where all the computer systems throughout your local government are all connected together in really smart ways. That complexity also increases, and of course your cost and risk go up exponentially as well. So there's a lot to consider, and it's not to say one phase is better than the other. In fact, it should be that you look at this and say, what's the appropriate level of service that we want to provide online for our local government based on the interest of the citizens that live there and the teams of folks that are there to provide the services. So, in other words, don't feel bad that, you don't have things like you might see in metropolitan Chicago or New York or St. Louis or something like Washington, D.C. or something like that, because that's not really what success is all about. Success, it goes back to what I said earlier. What are those key needs in your community, and are we doing a really good job at meeting those needs? So I think to be most effective is that you take bits and pieces from what's available out there and you custom build to really meet those local needs. And I think that's what really makes a big difference. So in the first stage of e-government are those websites that really are designed to publish information to the web and do a really good job of sharing what's happening in local government. Announcements about important meetings, the council meetings, for example. Or the thing I appreciated was when the city of Champaign posted information about the fall yard waste pickup schedule. Because we've been doing a lot of yard work, and I've got a mountain of dead trees and brown paper bags, and I didn't want to pay somebody $100 to dump this, stuff at this place that we have in the city legally. But what I wanted, but when I saw that schedule and said, "Oh, great! I now I know when I can put stuff on the curb and the city will pick it up." Those kinds of announcements are tremendous, and I think our public is very hungry for just good basic information about services in particular, and so. These are lessons from the very first days of the web, where really all we did is put basic information out there, and it just was very valuable. In the next stage, we not only post information, but we start posting ways to have two-way communication with the public, so that not only this information is there, but I can send an email very quickly and get a response as well. So that's really made a big difference. And that's really helped to move us into this third phase where we put more forms and other information there on the site and make it easier for people. Again, just to make the everyday life of a person just much more simpler. So if I need a form, like for my, in our home we've got the burglar alarm, I can just go online and just download the form, fill it out, and mail it in. And instead of going the old days, you have to go down to the police department to get, it would cost me driving time plus paying for a meter plus waiting in line and so forth. The more that we can put these forms online can really help to save a lot of time for the public. And then as we move from that, we move to the next phase and say, well, not just download the PDF of the form, but also tie that to a back-end database as well. And then that's really helping to see more transactional types of activities and services being enabled through the website and really making a very large difference. Now, this stage actually is, I think, a very important strategic step for local governments to reach, because the other thing that happens when we reach this point is that we're also starting to shift some of the very significant costs of providing those services out to the public. Because if you think about it, if in stage 3 you can get forms, you're really cutting down the amount of time it might take for a person in position to pass out a form or to keep the forms stocked. This transaction step is very important because now what we're doing is we're shifting more of the data entry responsibilities from your internal staff out to the public. It's actually a really well-hidden way of crowdsourcing, which is kind of a buzz term these days, of letting the public do some of the work. It shifts a lot of costs and so forth. But there's big risks that you've got to keep in mind. First is, again, remember when we talk about little d democracy, anonymity is important, but except for when you actually have to do a transaction, we need to know exactly who are you, and we need to authenticate you. So that means there's a lot you have to add to your system in terms of security to make sure that you authenticate who that person is that's using your site. The second issue you've got to think about is the quality of information. A well-designed site that is actually allowing the public to enter in information should have controls in place to make sure you're checking the quality of that information. Key in that is the personal information and the address information as well, and then thirdly, credit card information if you're taking payment. So that really raises the cost of your system. And then, as you know, as soon as you start collecting that personal information and you store it into a database, the third cost driver you have to consider is security, because now you've got personal identifiable information in a computer database that can be accessed through the internet. And so you've got to make sure that you have all the security things in place to protect that information as well. And that really, again, drives up your cost. Lastly is this connected, others around the world call it joined up, others call it transformational. This is when we get our multiple computer systems all talking to each other. Local government, you may have your tax system with your land system, with other payments and so forth. It's getting them all to talk to one another. There's all kinds of economies of scale and scope that you can achieve by doing it. This really sets the stage for more personalized types of experiences when you're online and so forth. And this is the most costly type of system to have as well. So there are a number of key technologies that help make all this happen. At the end of the day, what really matters here is that you've got essentially a large database with a number of different tools that basically talk to that database and that allow you to enter in information and to create more interactive types of web interfaces. At the end of the day, that's really what these technologies are all about. It's really a database that is, I call it a database on steroids is really what you're talking about here. And so a big part of managing your e-government services is being comfortable with the various types of technologies that will be needed to do this. There's a number of services that are out there that really help to make this more effective for you to manage, but there are a number of key tools. And depending on what you want to do, will also drive the types of things the types of tools that you'll need. With more advanced things, you can do data mining and go through and understand more about your citizens by looking and doing analysis with the data, and we'll talk more about that. If you have a large amount of data, search engines become important to allow the public to go in and search for the right forms or the right bits of information, as an example. So we're at a point now where there are a lot of cool new tools that are making it easier for us to do these things. The social media wave is really making a large difference. We're seeing so many governments that are using social media as a way of reaching out to the public, using Facebook or using Twitter, are very powerful. One of the PhD students that's working with me, Adrian, and I'm not sure if Adrian's logged in, and she's co-teaching the eGov class. Part of her work is looking at public participation and the use of social media. The social media tools are remarkable because they're very easy to use. And then you have very good reach with them as well. So you see a lot of local governments will set up Facebook pages as a way of reaching out to the public as well. So social media is very important. The other thing that's happening is that with the social media era, we're thinking more about our online experiences. And this drives actually from the research and practices around the service economy, where the big service leaders, like think about Walt Disney or some of the theme-based restaurants, or even some of the big online places like Amazon and Google and so forth, they're all about the experience. And so not only people's expectations through the use of social media, but also through expectations about creating the experience economy. It's not just I want a service, but I'm looking for an experience. I'm looking for a good, positive experience as well. So that's also part of the strategy. The cloud is a third component of this. It used to be that we kept all of our services locally at a local government, and frankly, this was a major barrier, especially for smaller governments, to providing government services. Now we're seeing the cloud happening. So what the cloud is that we have computer services, applications that are available through the internet. So you don't have to have specialized computers or specialized software. Instead, you can go out on the internet and you can use it there. The new Microsoft Office is a cloud-based software. Gone are the days when you'd have to get remember the old 3.5-inch disc or get a CD and actually load it up on your computer. But instead, you sign up for a subscription online and use the services as well. Email is becoming one of those applications that we use through the cloud. It used to be you'd have to have an email team, you'd be responsible for email, and so forth. And that really is changing so much now because you can get it through services that are available online. And Silva's is asking a question. She's saying, one of the challenges of local governments is access and comfort of local elected officials with technology, including email. How can we help those communities and or individuals use technology more effectively, or help community members develop appropriate expectations about response time or service? So those are really good questions. Some of these tools here that I'm actually mentioning, like social media, cloud-based tools, are great ways of doing that. But there's a certain learning curve to be able to be comfortable doing that. One of the things that we're actually doing through this grant is we're helping to train local government officials through training. And it's not just how do I use the email system, but how do I use it in a way that is responsive to the public. There's a certain writing style in when using email, especially if you are doing it from an official government position, that's important. There's also an expectation of response time. A lot of research is showing that as we tend to do more services online, we're starting to get used to faster service. And so our expectations are changing. And so there are strategies for online services to really help manage those expectations more effectively. One thing that I do when I work with local governments is develop those kinds of strategies around their service model. And I really talk about how service quality is important and how it shifts. We have to think about quality in terms of reliability of the service, being empathetic to the public, giving assurance and being trustworthy, and being responsive. And so there are ways of doing it online. Especially if we have a greater presence with social media and that kind of thing. But one of the best practices is, of course, training is important. A second important practice is assigning people to actually watch these various outlets, the social media outlets, and so forth. And then a third thing I like to do is actually have a set of scripts together so that you know how to respond and so forth. I think I see a lot of governments that do a good job of this by setting up protocols for the length of time to respond, even with the automated email response and saying, thanks for your email. We really care about your issue and problem. If it's during the work week, we promise to get back with you within the next 24 hours and that type of thing. Those little service quality things, I think, make a very big difference in how you do this. And so one thing that we're doing with this grant is helping local governments develop those strategies. And so, yeah, those scripts are a really good idea. A little secret, I don't think any of my students are in class. It's happening on campus. I'll have students that send an email out at 2 in the morning and expect you to, be up and have a response by 3. And it just doesn't work like that. So I, kind of change their expectations. And having some scripts are a really helpful way of doing it. And having people that are able to, keep up and respond to these problems is very important as well. So those are just some ideas that are starting to come up. Another thing that's happening as we go forward is the notion of smart cities, and we'll certainly talk more about this. And this is actually a form of joined up e-government. And what we're joining up is not only all the administrative systems, but we're also joining up sensors in our streets and in our street lights and our electronic meters and those types of things. And so we're going to talk more about smart cities and smart communities as we go forward. Another thing we're starting to see is a shift towards not only consuming but producing. With our grant, we're reaching out with people all across the state with what we call the Fab Lab. And this gives people a chance to use 3D printers, lasers, computers, and all kinds of computer-controlled devices to actually produce things. It's a do-it-yourself space and allow people to tinker and invent new ideas and things like that. And we're seeing that as people gain these skills of producing, they are becoming more and more comfortable in how they interact with local government. Let's drill down and take an even closer look with an example. So one of the things that's happening is that we're seeing that e-government's really this space where you're mashing up lots of different applications and data all together. I do a lot of work with mapping software, with geographic information system software. And for me, a map is everything. I've been doing GIS for about 25, 26 years. And I teach a course on it. And it's very powerful when you look at it in the context of e-government. And then you also look at how we've got new data coming from satellites, and we also have social media data being produced. So if we look at an example of San Francisco parking. So it's really interesting. Parking is a big problem no matter where you live. And it's an important source of revenue. It's important that we do a good job of managing it and so forth. But I think it's a very powerful example of the power of e-government. Parking is a very political issue as well. So in San Francisco, they've got serious parking congestion, especially in the downtown area. And they've taken all of their different bits and pieces of data related to parking and mashed it up all together. So you've got your GIS maps with all of the city streets, and they've embedded sensors that actually They put sensors in parking spaces and parking garages, so you get real-time information about if a lot is available or if a spot is available or not. And they run it through this GIS system, and from there it's sent out through another system and made publicly available on the internet. And this information can be downloaded real-time on your phone. And so it's amazing because then now, as you're driving, you can drive more efficiently to the open parking spot. The same bit of information that's being used for parking is being used for transit. They have transit layers, so you have real-time information for all the buses, and so you can do a better job of estimating the arrival time at a pickup location for the buses there. The same information can be used for planning. To plan out, should we consider changes in our parking policies so that there's more churn in parking? Should we make changes in our transit system so that we have more effective routes where the demands are and things like that? And all that information is embedded inside of their information system. And then by making it publicly available and using what they call open APIs, you've got developers that are developing their own applications. The city of San Francisco didn't have to develop applications for the public. The developers did it. And some of the folks who are doing the programming were high school groups that were doing it as part of a science class, for example. So that really shows the power of e-government. Maybe you don't have the problems of San Francisco, but you do have the ability to take whatever information you have and organize it in a way so you can really address not only your day-to-day operations, but think about bigger, broader issues as well. And I think that's really what e-government is all about. So over our this webinar series, we'll talk more about these issues in detail. We'll talk next about how do we do planning with technology, and then we'll talk more about data as well. As we go along, I'll be more specific about how we think about our cost of doing this. How do we improve our ability to accept and use in terms of learning, like with Ann Silva's question, and so forth. But a highlight of some of the things I want to talk about will be some key strategies of how we need to take e-government and focus on the individual needs of each citizen in our cities and townships and so forth. How do we develop the right types of resources and capabilities to do that? And then certainly, how do we protect all this? It's a real big issue. As we think about this framework that I'll explain more and talk more about is this right here. This is my strategy slide right here, where I think e-government's effective if we meet each and every need within our community. But we can't do it alone. We've got to bring in people, organizations outside to help us to do that. And we also have to make sure that our local governments are really set up well to do it. And we need to capture as much data as we can and analyze as much of that data as possible. And we need to do this in thinking about technology, because it's not just technology for technology's sake. Technology actually exists in a broader context that we have to consider to be effective in using it. And we have to really build the skills inside of our organization. But what I think is that we're at a point now where it's becoming easier to do with more training and more directed training on how to do this. And this is actually a big part of what our grant's all about, and how my center, the Center for Digital Inclusion, really wants to help local governments throughout our state to really help build those skills and so forth. And we'll consider what's new and different about technology today. It's a place where it's okay to play and experiment with new ideas. And another great way of learning is building networks with each other and sharing ideas with each other. And at the end of the day, it's about having fun with doing this, because I think the more that we have, more that we can make this fun and pleasant, the better off we're all going to be. So with that, I'm happy to take a few questions from you. Good. Thanks for the feedback, Pam. Yeah, as I'm saying, today is the first of a three-part webinar, and this grant is awesome because then if you have ideas and specific to your local community, you can send me an email at jongant@illinois.edu, and I'm really happy to talk with you more. I'm teaching an e-government class. I actually have some students that would love to, be part of those conversations as well, and we can talk about ways of customizing some training for your local government as well. Yeah, so I've got there's a number of different studies, and actually Adrian has some really good stats on that. When we look around the country, most every local government has some type of web presence, but it's always the better way of answering this question is to what extent are they doing. So most have a web presence one way or another. We're seeing a rising number that are using social media like Facebook and Twitter as a way of having more citizen participation in government. I think most local governments are doing a few transactions online. The risk of it's pretty high, so I think there's a lot of reservation about actually taking credit card numbers and things like that online. But most of what we see locally is being used to provide information and really staying on top of that, and it really makes a large difference as well. So I look forward to speaking with you all in the next two webinars. And as I said, if you have any further questions, more specific, I will be happy to answer those questions as well. And any feedback you might have will be really great too. So thank you all very much.
Dr. Gant, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and presenting this great webinar topic. I think it was a great discussion today. And I'd also like to thank all of our participants for joining in with us. We do look forward to seeing everyone on October the 15th. And then again on November the 19th. So with that, we'll conclude our webinar today, and we look forward to the next time.